For those of you who have not been here before, this is one of the highlights of our summer programming. It's a chance to interact with experts in their field, as in the case of Professor Chen, an internationally renowned expert. And for those of you who are just here because it's your reporting year for CLE credit, I have this is the only reason I'm here, I can say. And there may be others of you. There is a sign-up sheet in the back, so you can get your credit, 1 hour credit, CLE credit. And for those of you who this is your first summer in Vermont, I encourage you, keep coming back to these. This is one of those like hidden treasures of Vermont Law School, are this opportunity to really hear on cutting edge, leading, fascinating topics from experts in their field. And so today we're pleased to have James Chen, who's the Justin Smith Morrill Chair. That's an impressive name to be associated with.
Right here in Vermont.
You're right here in Vermont? Yeah, he's a Vermont. But at Michigan State Law School. He is also of counsel to a group called the Technology Law Group in DC. They specialize in telecommunications law. And for those of you law students who are terrified of these topics, listen to this. His experience in teaching and scholarship covers administrative law, antitrust, behavioral and mathematical finance, agricultural law, constitutional law, economic regulation, environmental law, legislation, natural resources law, and state and local taxation. So this is a man who is unafraid of intellectual challenges. He has taken on all of the most difficult and complex issues with gusto. He edits a series called The Quantitative Perspectives on Behavioral Economics and Finance. He's written a couple of books in that series called Postmodern Portfolio Theory, Finance and Behavioral Prospect, and Econophysics and Capital Asset Pricing. He's the author of the topic that I think is a vital issue right now in the world, and certainly here in Vermont, called disaster law and policy. It's an emerging area, sadly, as a consequence of climate change, that's increasingly relevant. He's got his bachelor's and master's from Emory and his JD from Harvard. This is his 4th year. We're so pleased to have James here to speak to us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate being back in Vermont, and this is a topic that actually tracks my time here. It represents an attempt to synthesize many of the things that I started to think about 4 years ago when I started that series on mathematical perspectives and behavioral economics and finance, and it coincided with my taking on the task, or actually the pleasure of teaching environmental economics here in the summer at Vermont Law School. So this is an attempt to unite the two fields, and more broadly, it's an attempt to put a little bit of analytical rigor, big data, into what I consider to be a very rigid and unrealistic economic approach to law, typically called neoclassical law and economics. And what I want to demonstrate, if nothing else, is one, people with law degrees can in fact handle mathematics and should. Two, if nothing else, you'll go away with an understanding of what's really underlying big data. And three, hopefully this will reveal some of the underlying psychophysics of human decision making, especially under uncertainty. Now, how many of you have actually read your 401k or 403b statements? Have not. Okay. Old age has a big surprise for you. Right. So, those of you who have, and if you haven't, you do get these statements, do take a look, because they often provide so-called MPT, or modern portfolio theory statistics. And what it is actually just the capital asset pricing model, which is just a two-moment variation on what I'm about to present to you. Okay, the mathematical details, actually, it's reduced to a 1 or 2 page set of equations. The deeper paper and the book from which it is drawn, which is a generalized capital asset pricing model, which I'm due to deliver later this summer, will have all the brutal details. And if that's not enough, just let me know, and I'll be more than happy to send you the 5 or 10 page formal mathematical specification. But here's the instinct, okay? If you look at those financial statements, you'll see that there is this one number that says this was your return, annualized return over the previous 70 years. And they may actually give you a number that's called standard deviation or volatility. Those are two different words for the same thing. Now, it turns out I've drawn them out, 1, 2, 3, and 4, on this Bellish curve. And the fact that it's slightly lopsided is a feature, not a bug. It's not just an artifact of my inability to draw. Okay, so what I want to point out is this. If you take, and this is very technical stuff, just hear it out, it's written down, you don't necessarily need to understand it, just get the results. If you take the Taylor series expansion of mean logarithmic return, it generates an approximation that can be expressed in terms of all of the statistical moments of the distribution of returns itself. Namely, it gives a positive coefficient to the odd-numbered statistical moments, most interestingly, mean, moment 1, and skewness, moment 3, as well as a negative coefficient to even-numbered moments, most interestingly, variance, the square root of which is standard deviation or volatility, and kurtosis. Now, what are these fancy words? Okay, so taking a look at this distribution, it's the bell curve, the good sides to the right, the bad sides to the left, and it's expressed in logarithmic form because it's returns, not arithmetic quanta. Okay, all the technicalities aside, here's what you need to know. The mean return, right, that's what you should expect is the value of your portfolio is moment 1, it's moved. Where is it, right? It's a position parameter. The dispersion is your variance. How wide are your returns? Your skewness is whether the number of big events, good events, outweighs the number of bad events. It's a lean issue. And then finally, the question of the fatness of your tails, right? Just how big are extreme events at either end, and I'll fly like a bird, that's kurtosis. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. Just keep doing this and you've got it. All right. So let's go to statistical form. If that was too complicated, let me play Snowball the Pig and reduce it in even simpler terms for everybody. Odd moments good, even moments bad. Odd moments good, even moments bad. Snowball is the great leader. Odd moments good, even moments bad. Okay, so all you have to remember is that the expected value, or the mean, if it's positive, you like the outcome. If the skewness is positive, right, you have more good events than bad events, even if the magnitude of the events balances out differently, you like what's going on. However, all the things being equal, being pushed to one side or the other is generally a bad thing. This is the, oh my gosh, well, there's been a giant run up in asset values. What's going to happen though? Will there be a giant crash? Will there be a 10% correction? Will there be a 20% recession? I don't know. I can't sleep. That's why we typically say that variance or standard deviation is bad. I just want to extend it to other moments. Right? So odd moments good, even moments bad. All right. Now, there's another way of dealing with these numbers. Okay, so if you do pay attention to your to your 401k, 403b statement. Your money manager does report to you the mu and sigma, that is to say mean and standard deviation. Well, that's just the first two moments. As you can see, this general model, and I didn't have to stop at 4, I could have gone to 5 or 6, but even statisticians don't really have good names for moments 5 or 6. I've heard hyper-skewness and hyper-flatness. Now, let's just stick to these 4. But frankly, they think that we're so stupid we can only deal with 1 and 2. 1, 2, buckle my shoe. That's all that the traditional capital asset pricing model does. And I'm pretty sure, I haven't looked at this on Westlaw or Lexis to see if board review articles typically talk beyond the first 2 moments. I get the feeling that most of them, when they talk about the capital asset pricing model, just stop at 2. We don't have to, and especially in environmental contexts where the statistical properties of good and bad events are actually quite convoluted and quite confusing, and frankly, the word I'm looking for is abnormal, right? That we really ought to take a look at the higher moments. Now, what's a good word for things that are more than 2, but not that many? I don't know. Just give me a couple of minutes here. Just give me some time. Couple of simply means, right? It literally means 2. But when I say give me a couple of minutes, no one literally means 120 seconds. I mean a few. Okay? Now, if only we all spoke a Slavic instead of a Germanic language. Wait a second, it's going to happen. Party of Trump, national strength. Not Ruski, of course. All right, so Ruski, that's in Russian. But Russian is really not my my best of the Slavic languages. Actually, I'm totally faking in Russian. I'm not faking it, so you know what I'm about to do. I'm not faking. Let me read a message, okay? And this is just a political message. I will translate it. Nakon 13 godina braka slovenskoj ženi ne zna još predsjednik Sjedinjenih Američkih Država kako kazati ja ljubim te na slovenskom jeziku. Draga prva damo, vaše čizme su bile stvorene za hoditi. After 13 years of marriage to a Slovenian woman, the President of the United States still doesn't know how to say, I love you, in Slovenian. Dear First Lady, your boots were made for walking. Okay, that's just to establish that I have some credibility in Slavic morphology and syntax. When you talk about wolves, okay, as in, oh, wolves, the Slavic word is actually, it works for a lot of languages, vuk. But you don't actually say vukovi, or plural wolves, when you're counting them. Listen carefully. Jedan vuk. Dva, tri, četiri. Vuk. Oh, damn, that was good. I pet.
Vukove?
Vukova. Vukove in the accusative. Nice. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So got the generative plural instead of the generative singular. Look, I'm just establishing that the human brain can and does handle 3 and 4 different from 1 and 2. That's all. That's the Palco pause. Gave me a chance to show off my mastery of at least Serbo-Croatian, if not Slovenian. But oh well, working on that too. All right, so back to the math, back to law. It turns out that 3, 4 wolves at the door. I know, there's a change of the nursery rhyme. I didn't grow up with them, so I can change them. 3, 4 wolves at the door are the most interesting statistical properties in the generalized higher moment asset pricing model. What do I mean by that? Look, it's only when skewness and kurtosis, the third skewness, which way is it skewed, moment is taken into account, or the fat tails are taken into account, then it gets really interesting. And because mostly law and policy speak of only the point estimate of the mean return, or at most, the standard deviation without taking into account whether standard deviation is on the upside or the downside, none of those subtleties, we wind up with all sorts of traps. Okay, so let's start with 3, skewness preference. Just give you a stunning sociological attribute of the United States today. Quickly, do you all know what just give me a good ballpark guess of mean household income in the United States? Actually, better than that, median, 50th percentile, who is a household right smack in the middle. And this takes into account rural Vermont as well as Manhattan. It takes into account basically all of Nebraska and Killington and Pico, right? So the high and the lows of American sociology. So roughly $60,000 would put you right smack in the middle, okay? All right, good. Even if you take about 4/5 of that figure, you want $50,000 to live on, you still need, conservatively, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million a year in portfolio value at the time that you retire. What is the percentage of people who actually have that, even though they are within 10 years of projected retirement? It's a very scary and very low number, okay? All right, so given all that, what do you suppose, for the people at the lowest end of that spectrum, is the #1 savings vehicle in the United States? My students know this. Hush. The state-sponsored lottery. You laugh. You are laughing at your fellow citizens' misery. Why? The expected return on the lottery is negative. You're losing money. Why? What makes the lottery more attractive? Okay, you can say, well, if I keep it in the mattress, it might get stolen. Even at that, you're better off leaving it under the mattress. It's the skewness. It's the fact that there are events at one extreme that pay off in a big way that makes the lottery attractive. And if you think that this is just a lower income phenomenon, think of how many people on both sides of that bitterly divided political aisle signed, sponsored, and lauded the 2012 Jobs Act, Jumpstart Our Businesses Startups Act of 2012, which has the infamous, we don't care about Regulation D, we don't care about accredited investors, equity crowdfunding for all. Really, you want to buy startup stock? That's something really cool to do when you're occupying your $2 million penthouse in San Francisco County. Actually, $2 million is a crap hole, right? At least in San Francisco, right? You can't afford to live there for anything less than 5. My gosh. And yet, they're all throwing money at startups. Guess what? Even those masters and mistresses of the universe are throwing money away. It's the skewness preference, okay? And it's not just finance. Just yesterday, earlier this week at any rate, the President of the United States, the non-Slovenian speaker, who is Commander-in-Chief, signed a bill called the Right to Try Act of 2018. To hell with food and drug regulation. Let's have expanded access to all drugs as long as you can say you're really sick. You know what? It's a perfect fit for the campaign that he ran. Really nice people. Come on! What do you have to lose? Take a chance! Guess what? When you think you've got nothing to lose, you do take ridiculous chances. My students know this. What's the classic model? What's the classic method when you're already down $1 billion of Chase JP Morgan money that you really shouldn't have accessed? What do you do? By the way, if you're down $1 billion, that's the universe's sign. It's a message. You suck. You're lacking in talent in your chosen financial field. And yet, what do people do invariably when they're down $1 billion? What's $1 billion among friends? Let's double down. 60-to-1 leverage trading in sovereign Polish debt. What the hell? Let's go for it. We see affirmative risk-taking all the time. This is Skewness preference. Okay. It's really dangerous in mathematical terms is when the expected value is 0 or negative, but you have positive skewness. Watch out. These are circumstances where you can predict not only risk-taking, stupid, Darwin Award-worthy risk-taking. Right? Because all of a sudden, that third moment, ooh, I'm going to trash the Maryland lottery. Every day dreams come true. Every day the dreamer could be you. Thank you very much for voluntarily contributing to the fiscal health of your government in Annapolis. Yes. Look at all the suckers out there playing with skewness preference. All right. Now, what about moment 4? Moment 4, here's the problem with this. So we see Category 5 hurricanes. We see earthquakes in the 8, 9 magnitude. Powers of 10. Ooh, numbers are hard. Who cares? They're just big numbers. Folks, these catastrophic events are getting bigger. And the problem is that when you have giant kurtosis, do you know what history is good for? A little bit like war or law. Absolutely nothing. When you have giant kurtosis, that's simply mathematics' way of telling you everything that you thought you knew is mush. It's garbage. It doesn't mean anything. Because all you're seeing, there is the possibility that you've only gotten this far. That 100-year flood, well, really, do you have 100 years of data? 500 years, I don't know. Right? Have the Passamaquoddies shared their data with you? Have you read it properly? Probably not. So chances are there are a lot of things out there, and if it's a dynamic situation, you've changed climate, Earth is not operating the way it was in the past, even your history's not reliable. Okay, so when you have these situations, well, what do you do? All right, this is a very, very complicated question, and I'm still not sure I even got the right answer. But I do know a couple of things in this realm. One, so why do people take these outsized chances? And even when there's actually a risk of catastrophic downside loss. So this is not the situation, it's distinct from the situation where the guy has, by the way, it's always a guy. Okay, that itself is an interesting observation. But it's always a man who runs up the billion-dollar deficit in the trading book of a systemically important financial institution, a CFI. Never fails. Okay? I know of no instance where any woman has run this up. Could be, by the way, in post-Great Recession, post-2008, Iceland was a country that really got trashed. The number one characteristic that people are looking for in a financial advisor is, please, let her be named Helga, not Helgi, okay? So the women of Iceland are now running the financial system. Presumably that is good news for the Great Northern Vikings. All right, so it's a little bit different, but under these conditions of uncertainty, it still makes sense, right? If what you need is a particular outcome, you might actually dangerously seek variance or kurtosis. It's loving the second moment. It's not saying, well, I just prefer the skewness. It's just saying, look, I don't care where the outcome is. 1 in 3, to be honest with you, don't really matter anymore. I'm just an even moment thinker. And what I really need is I need some outcomes that are in either direction. And frankly, I need outcomes over here, and I'm willing to accept. If you take the good, you got to take the bitter with the sweet. Arnett versus Kennedy, not the majority opinion, just because this is a CLE, I got to emphasize that. But you can take the bitter with the sweet. You just say, but I want the sweet. I'm emphasizing something on the sweet side. And under those conditions, even though there is vastly greater uncertainty, you might have rational, not destructive risk-seeking. So you have irrational risk-seeking on the third moment, potentially defensible risk-seeking on the fourth. Okay, so let me give you a couple of environmental applications, because this is, after all, not just a demonstration of the analytical approach, the statistical approach, the I love risk and uncertainty as opposed to clarity approach to law and economics. And those of you who are in legal academia know that law and economics likes to make clear, crisp, analytical conclusions. This approach says, I don't know. Once upon a time, I'll just have to indulge a story. There was a judge on the DC circuit. You can figure out who this might have been. I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader. That's a good mathematical tradition. Who said, hey, Chen, you're hanging out with my clerks. I want to test something out on you. So, for every legal proposition, every question of law, there exists one and exactly one correct answer. Well, answer. Your Honor, with all due respect, I prefer Vienna Heisenberg to you. Go clerk for him, not for me. The fact is that we're dealing under conditions of uncertainty all the time, and the very act of trying to determine what the certainty is changes the outcome, or at least makes it impossible for you to be certain in what you're observing. Okay, that's a postmodern philosophy drawn from modern physics, hence econophysics, among other things, right? So, what do we do with a world where things are uncertain, outcomes can be catastrophic, and we're just biologically built to handle risk a particular way? Prospect theory. Nobel Prize for Daniel Kahneman. It would have also gone to Amos Tversky, who's a co-author in all the papers, except for one small problem. You can only win a Nobel Prize if, okay, the committee actually has to get it together. Number one. But number two, assuming the committee hasn't Me Too'd itself into oblivion. They can only give it to you if you are alive. Okay, so stay alive if you want to win a Nobel. Prospect theory actually maps very nicely to generalized higher moment asset pricing. Number one, you always look to where you start, not where you end. Number two, I hate the Patriots, I'm sorry. I'm Falcons fan, that's all I need to say. I liked you until just then. Oh, hold on. That's the Broncos. Okay, they're okay. Actually, they're not okay. My team went to the big game twice, and they got humiliated by the Broncos and the Patriots. Okay. 25-point lead, 3 minutes in the third quarter. My God, taking the knee 3 times and kicking it would have been a better choice. Okay. What do we do about the fact that I can remember every loss, but not the wins? Losing hurts worse than winning feels good. In case you want a legal citation, it is the threat of loss, not the prospect of gain, that is the essence of coercion. Okay? That's Butler versus United States, Justice Stone dissenting, 1937. Right? So Supreme Court citation for just about everything, even if it's not perfectly documented, and even if it's just instinctively instead of quantitatively or analytically expressed. So the Supreme Court of the United States anticipated Daniel Kahneman by about 40 years and said, losing hurts worse and winning feels good. But here's the problem. As we get to these edges where kurtosis is high, we're not built to handle kurtosis. We may know the Pockle numbers. We may know how to say Pietri Vukova, 4 wolves, but we don't know how to handle the fourth moment. We just say, you know, what's $1 billion among friends? I'm already down 1, what's down 3? My life is over anyway. It's like running into the black bear. I know what they tell you. You run into the bear in the woods, you should, you know, it's like, is it a black bear or a grizzly? Don't run. No, Bill Bryson says, run. It'll give you something to do in the last 60 seconds of your life. I endorse that wholeheartedly. Okay, so here we are dealing with prospect theory. The problem is that humans actually are built to think of everything in these 3 rules. Think of where you start. You want to avoid losses because losing hurts worse than winning feels good. But once you've started winning or started losing, it's a little bit like crystal meth. More doesn't feel any better. Okay? It's just diminishing sensitivity. So maybe that was a little too crude. Think of it as type 2 diabetes. All that insulin that your body is generating isn't helping. Okay? Your immune system isn't quite doing what it's supposed to do, and oops, that dinner roll turns into the equivalent of the entire pecan pie. Okay, so we have these natural limitations. And the question is, how do we deal with these in environmental settings? So I've got 3 H's that I'll send you off with as concrete examples. Hartwick, Hartzman, and hurricanes. So we start with Hartwick, because this is the most important, this is the ironclad rule of environmental economics. Do you realize what we've been dealing with here? We've been dealing with pure economy, eco-economy, as opposed to ecology. We've handled other languages in the Balkans. Why not Greek? Ecos, O-I-K-O-S, accent over the I, means house. Basic housekeeping is the essence of economics and ecology. Okay. All of these examples have come from capital markets where money is fungible, you can move millions in a millisecond. You have the closest thing to the frictionless, transaction cost-free market for free exchange that Ronald Coase and that other Nobel Prize in law and economics would tell you, right? You've got perfect exchange. Okay. Is that really true when it comes to environmental assets, ecosystem services? Well, if you think that they are fungible, that you can make the trade, that what you can do is you can extract oil from Alaska, which is a depletable and depleting resource, but hey, we can throw it in a permanent fund and not only relieve present generations of the need to pay income tax, but also leave some money for future generations. Then you would agree with John Hartwick, 1977, American Economic Review article that said, look, you can achieve sustainability even as you consume exhaustible, finite resources in the present generation, provided that you invest everything and compensate future generations, as if the future generations agreed to the bargain. They, of course, did not. But if you accept that premise, what you're accepting is 100% the applicability of financial economics to environmental economics. If you do not accept it, then you're going with the physics side and the ecology side over the economic side. Okay? I think I just went from stage left to stage right. That was totally coincidental. But what you're basically saying is, I'm going to insist, Arnie Ness style, I'm going to insist on not just the biological valuation of this ecosystem service, or the species, right, or this physical site, but I'm going to insist on physical flows, as in matter and energy. If you do not have the same water flow, if you don't have the same oxygen demand, the oxygen delivery in this water course, if you don't have the same number of photons striking, you've not achieved sustainability. So this debate about sustainability really comes down to a debate over the extent to which you can use these concepts of financial economics in environmental settings. Now, you say, oh, no, that's a right of center, that's just a rapacious corporate thing to do. Oh yeah? How many people think that it's a good idea to save Costa Rica and all that biodiversity that's there, exceeding the rest of North America broadly defined, because somewhere the cure for cancer, if not for jerkishness, or bad football teams, can be found in the rainforest? Come on, don't be embarrassed. I believe that, sure. Okay, guess what? That is skewness preference on steroids, okay? What you're basically saying is the portfolio of the biosphere. It is the entire portfolio of DNA-bearing organisms with all their diversity, and you know what? I only care about the one that I can crush into a cancer-curing drug. Believe it or not, this is exactly the same thing that people do, and quite a few people do exactly this. You know what they do when they get their portfolio, the people who actually read their 403 statements or their hedge fund statements? You know what they do? They don't actually read the whole thing and evaluate it. No, they see who won this last month, which stock was my greatest position and went up, which stock went down. Oh, I'll call the losers and throw more money at the winners. But they do, right? This is the first, the worst, and ignore the rest. You know what you've just done? You've just devalued the entirety of the portfolio. To emphasize the flagship charismatic species might be helpful to get people's attention, might help them think that it's good not to waste the rainforest, but it doesn't do anything for your true understanding of the ecosystem service at issue. Okay, so you're engaging in skewness preference, even as you pretend to be environmentally sensitive. All right. By the way, the reason I call that Hartzman is that that's Samuel Hartzman, the first, the worst, and ignore the rest, University of Chicago Booth School of Business, right? So there is some instinct behind these decisions. Now, let me just close with the example of hurricanes. And in fact, that's why I said this is only by being here at Vermont Law School could I have actually thought of this. So, as you all heard earlier on, I have worked a lot in the last dozen years or so. In fact, 13 years. You can spot the month and the year, August 2005. Dan Farber, my former colleague, and I said, well, this hurricane in Louisiana, Katrina, it's pretty bad stuff. We know a few things about environmental law. The two of us probably know more math than most people in law teaching. So what the hell, let's go ahead and take a shot at disaster law. And now, more than a dozen years later, I realized something about disaster law and extreme events. Turns out that there is a mystery that I hadn't really given any thought until this week actually, as I'm teaching environmental economics and markets here at Vermont Law School, so give a plug to the summer program. Here's the problem. Think about how much you would be willing to pay in order to ensure the ongoing existence of Ursus maritimus, the polar bear, it's going to be a higher number than people would bid for immediate consumption of the polar bear population as bushmeat and fur, which is a good thing, by the way, right? So your willingness to pay is a way, it's a contingent valuation technique, especially for option value or passive use values, non-use values in environmental valuation. Now imagine the opposite situation. You have a certain amenity, let's say nice open space, forests that have grown back after the retreat of agriculture in New England. Okay, yeah, I know, but people think agriculture in New England is an unfettered good. No, it's not. The forest is coming back. Less human footprint, good thing. Hey, we all agree that dropping a mammoth commune style, well, we may not all agree on this, but most of us, I would imagine, would think that it's not a good idea to drop a mammoth commune style, high density residential project right on top of the historic homesteads of Justin Smith Morrill and Joseph Smith and, you know, the greater metropolitan Royalton area, right? This is a bad idea. I know, it's a controversial thing, but just stake that out. All right, so if you assume that is true, okay, how much would you accept in exchange for letting them do this? I can deal with it. Just give me enough that I can just move out of here and go to some other quaint, bucolic, nice place with all these nice amenities and I don't have to live next to them. Or give me enough that it gives me enough pleasure so I don't ever have to think about those nasty people living on the hill. That's a willingness to accept principle. Now, if you took Ronald Coase at his deceased word, or if you took all of neoclassical economics and the law and economics tradition, these two numbers should be exactly the same. Your willingness to accept the destruction of a benefit should be the same as your willingness to pay. This is very theoretically reassuring and nice. It has only one small problem. No experimental or real-life econometric evidence supports the proposition. There is always a premium. You always demand more money to accept the destruction of an environmental benefit or amenity than you would pay to preserve it. Now, until this week, I thought, oh yeah, my prospect theory behavioral model takes care of it. And that's good, because losing hurts worse and winning feels good. Citation to Kahneman and Tversky, move on, footnote written, publish more stuff in the law reviews. Okay, but it turns out, I think I'm wrong. Gosh, not only is my command of Slovenian and Serbo-Croatian better than certain people's, but I have the moral superiority in the ability to say, oops, I'm wrong, sorry. Then again, I'm not constitutionally eligible to be president of the United States either, so there's that. All right. More seriously, here's what I've determined, and I'll put this on the table. I think here's the reason that I'm wrong. I at least wasn't wrong, I was incomplete. It turns out that there are circumstances where the premium for willingness to accept over willingness to pay is extraordinarily high. These are the circumstances when we insist on more. One, public goods, goods that are historically associated with democratic mass access, typically but not invariably supplied by the government, as opposed to ordinary goods for which there is a ready private market and private providers will supply them in exchange for money. We also get anxious and demand a higher premium when we're asked to give something up if there is a certain degree of anxiety over whether it's going to continue existing. Right? If there's uncertainty about its future existence or the continued physical flow, we're going to ask for more money. Third, if there's a suggestion that, you want this because, dang it, you're greedy, you're selfish, you're nasty, you're morally repugnant in destroying this thing, just going up and blowing something up simply because you can, because you have more money, you have the property right, because your sense of aesthetics requires plastic and gilded fake marble. Go ahead, blow it up. In those circumstances, we say, we're going to raise the premium. We want you to pay us more. We're not going to accept money unless you pay more. Look at that. Turns out that commensurability or liquidity or substitutability, it turns out that the public regarding nature, the externalities, the potential for free ridership and other defects in private markets, and the possibility that there might actually be something called morality, all affect the willingness to accept. And every single one of those factors cuts against willingness to accept, which means that there's a premium. So it turns out, and this is a much, much, much longer lecture, and I'm about to close this one up. It turns out that this idea that willingness to accept isn't just a simplistic application of the losing hurts worse and winning feels good behavioral principle from prospect theory. It's also an instinct or a judgment about whether something is going to last, something is public regarding, and something has moral content that actually informs whether we are willing to accept versus being willing to pay for its conservation. So what this suggests in the aggregate, right, is that environmental economics understands something that financial economics has always understood. No asset can be valued except by reference to the state of the broader economy. No 10-year bond, right? No American depository receipt, no preferred share, nothing matters until you ask, what is inflation? What is unemployment? What's the overnight Fed rate? What's the 10-year bond, right? All of those economic values inform what the value of your 100 shares of ExxonMobil or 100 shares of Google are truly worth. Now, in the environmental setting, what this suggests is this. You cannot engage in Hartwick exchanges with any meaningful hope of making sure that you have made a proper commensurate exchange of natural or physical energy flows for a financial substitute unless you know the condition of the environment in which you make the trade. And there you connect all of environmental economics, if I may say so boldly, to all of financial economics. For as you see, I looked under the sun and saw that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but time and chance happen to them all. Thank you.
We've got time for a question or two if anyone has one.
I have a question.
Sure.
I don't profess to understand the Bellish curve over there that you put on the board for us, but where does the principle of randomness come in this?
Oh, so the whole point is that randomness says that when you take the entire universe of events and plot them This is the distribution of frequencies.
Okay.
Okay, and so randomness is the fact that, well, I could wind up on any throw of the darts over here, but I could just as easily wind up over here because if the vertical distance is the same, the frequency or the probability is the same. Okay, so the bell curve, and then the mathematical expression of this is that the area underneath this curve is always equal to 1. And because if we purport to cover all contingencies, all probabilities, then it should be equal to 1.
Okay, I'll try to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, this is really terrific. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.